The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, a quiet rhythm lost beneath the airport's endless announcements and the muted shuffle of tired shoes. Morning filtered in through long glass panes, half silvered by frost and half glowing with the pink ache of sunrise. It was a day like any other. Or at least, it tried to be. Grace Halloran sat on the edge of a molded plastic chair, her back straight not from confidence but necessity. Her spine had learned long ago how to hold up when everything else fell apart. She reached over and tugged gently at the zipper on her son's coat, pulling it up to the soft curve beneath his chin. "Cold?" she asked. Eli, 7 years old and far too wise for it, blinked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Not anymore." His voice was small, like birdsong before dawn. She smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. She had braided his hair this morning, though the front had already come undone from sleep and fidgeting. He looked like his father. It used to hurt. Now it just sat in her chest like everything else, quietly, constantly there. Gate B-17 was still half empty, the kind of stillness that only came in the early hours, before the frantic bustle of delays, announcements, and children losing mittens. A man rolled past on a floor polisher, and the noise of it briefly drowned out the world. Grace held a first-class ticket in the pocket of her coat. It had been her sister's idea, a holiday gift, a splurge, a just once, let yourself have it kind of thing. Her sister, who lived on the other coast and always smelled like lavender and made choices like plain upgrades and expensive yoga mats. "You deserve to feel like a person again," her sister had said over the phone. "Not just a mother." Grace had smiled and nodded and said thank you, and the words had caught in her throat because she didn't even know what just a person felt like anymore. Across from her, a soldier stood at the counter. He wasn't in full uniform, but he wore the boots, scuffed, mud-stained, heavy. A duffel bag hung from his shoulder, the kind that always seemed too small to carry a life but somehow did. His jacket bore a patch she couldn't name. He didn't look impatient. Just tired. A deeper kind of tired that didn't come from waking early but from waking up day after day and still being here. She wouldn't have noticed him if Eli hadn't asked, "Is he going to war?" Grace looked up, startled. "What?" Eli pointed at the man, eyes wide. "That guy. With the bag. Is he going to war like on the movies?" "No, honey," she said gently. "I don't think so." But she watched him now. The way he nodded slowly as the attendant spoke, the way he said, "It's all right, ma'am," and adjusted the strap of his bag. She caught enough to piece it together. The flight had been overbooked. Economy was full. He'd be moved to the next flight unless someone gave up a seat. Grace looked down at Eli, who was fussing with the Velcro on his shoe, tongue sticking out in concentration. They were traveling light, one carry-on between them. They had a long way to go and a tight connection. First class would have made it easier, but not essential. She stood. It wasn't a moment of glory. No swelling music. No cinematic pause. Just a woman reaching into her coat pocket, pulling out her ticket, and walking to the desk. "Excuse me," she said softly. The woman at the counter looked up. "Yes, ma'am." Grace placed the ticket gently on the counter. "Switch this with his. I'll take coach." There was a pause, like the world tilted slightly. "Are you sure?" the attendant asked. Grace nodded. "He looks like he's had enough waiting." She didn't wait for a thank you. She returned to her seat, pulled Eli close, and asked if he wanted a granola bar. The soldier approached a few minutes later. Not directly, just near enough that his presence filled the space between them. His voice was low, gravel-coated but careful. "Ma'am." Grace looked up. "Thank you," he said, like the words were fragile. She offered a small smile. It's a long flight. Might as well be comfortable. He didn't argue. He just nodded once. Then he glanced at Eli. The boy gave him a curious look. Are you a firefighter? The soldier crouched slightly, his knees popping. No, sir. Oh. Eli sounded vaguely disappointed. You just look strong. The man smiled, just barely. Not as strong as your mom. He stood again, gave Grace a final nod, and boarded when they called his name. Grace and Eli boarded last, squeezing into the back of the plane between a man who smelled like cold French fries and a woman who immediately fell asleep on Grace's shoulder. Eli curled into her side, clutching a tattered comic book. Grace stared at the tray table in front of her, her hand resting absently on her son's back. The hum of the engines began. They lifted from the earth in a soft tremble. She didn't think about the seat anymore. Until somewhere over Ohio, the woman next to her snored loudly, and Grace leaned toward the window, pressing her cheek to the cold glass. She thought, no one saw it. She thought, it didn't change anything. But then Eli stirred and whispered, that man is probably really happy now. And Grace closed her eyes. Just for a moment. They landed in Denver just before noon. The layover was short, 35 minutes, but enough for Eli to beg for a soft pretzel, so they stopped near a vendor with fluorescent lights and sticky floors. Grace balanced their bag on her hip and checked the monitors for their connecting gate. She didn't even see him walk past. She only noticed the empty first-class seat on the next flight and wondered, absently, if he'd made his connection or if he'd disappeared into some other life, some other city. She didn't even know his name. She didn't expect to see him again. She didn't know that the moment would matter. But something about the weight in her chest, light and strange and full of ache, told her. Something had shifted. Just a little. But enough. Daniel Rourke didn't belong in first class. He sat rigid in the wide leather seat, boots planted flat, knees apart like he was still in the hold of a transport carrier. His elbows didn't know what to do with all the space. Across the aisle, a businessman swirled a whiskey in a cut glass tumbler, and the hum of polite conversation folded over Daniel like static. Everything was too soft here. The air, the lights, the fabric of the seat. Even the voice of the stewardess sounded like it had been wrapped in gauze. He blinked slowly, eyes tracing the frost blooming along the edge of the window. Below them, the world lay buried under cloud and silence. He hadn't wanted the seat. He'd been ready to wait. He was always ready to wait. But then she'd stood up, just a woman in a threadbare coat, with a little boy eating raisins out of a sandwich bag, and handed the desk her ticket like it cost nothing. No words. No story. Just kindness passed from palm to palm like a folded note. He hadn't even said thank you like he meant it. His voice had come out hoarse, like a man startled mid-dream. Now he sat, trying not to shift too much, trying not to wrinkle the memory. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The envelope was still there, slightly creased, faded at the corners. The handwriting on the front was clean but unsteady. To Mom. If I don't make it. Daniel had carried it for 3 months. Across oceans, through sand, into church pews and over train station benches. He'd carried it past every moment he couldn't explain, every ache he refused to name. It had been handed to him by a woman with silver in her hair and a Bible clutched in both hands. They'd stood together outside a funeral. Her son had bled out in Daniel's arms during a night raid, his hand gripping Daniel's vest like a child refusing to let go. The woman had pressed the envelope into his hand and said, "I can't open it." "But maybe you should." He hadn't opened it. He hadn't earned the right. Until now. Maybe it was the seat. Or the soft voice of the flight attendant asking if he'd like warm nuts. Or the way the little boy had looked at him like he was someone worth admiring. He unfolded the flap carefully. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper. The ink was dark, rushed in places, shaky in others. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't tell you how scared I was. I didn't want you to worry. If I don't come back, don't blame yourself. You raised me right. Tell Danny he did everything he could. Tell him I saw the sky before I went. That I wasn't alone. That I forgave myself. I hope he does too." The words blurred slightly, not from the turbulence. Daniel didn't cry. He hadn't cried since Afghanistan. Or maybe before that. The emotion didn't come out through tears. It settled deep, under the ribs, behind the collarbone, in the throat. He folded the letter back, almost reverently, and stared straight ahead. The screen in front of him asked if he'd like to watch a comedy. He closed his eyes instead. In the memory, it was raining. The kind of rain that soaks through body armor and prayer. The boy, Private Alan Marquez, had been 19. Daniel had patched him up twice already in that war. The third time, there was too much red. The sand was sticky. The sky was black. There was nothing poetic about the way life slipped from the body. Alan had called for his mother. And then, in the final seconds, whispered, "Tell Danny, it's okay." Daniel had screamed at the corpseman, had pushed down harder, had done everything the manual said. But none of it mattered. They wrapped the body in silence and radio static. He wrote the official report like a man carving on stone. Afterward, he stopped writing letters. Stopped praying. Stopped letting himself believe anything more could be asked of him. He didn't know the name of the woman who gave up her seat. She hadn't introduced herself. She'd only looked at him like he was worth it, not because of rank or uniform or medals, but because she could see the exhaustion and still offer something. That quiet gesture haunted him now. Not like a ghost. More like a hand on the shoulder when he'd forgotten what warmth was. He stared down at his phone. Pulled up the boarding confirmation email. The manifest was listed there. He scrolled until he found it. Halloran, Grace. That was all he had. No phone number. No seat number. Just a name and a kindness that sat on his chest like a weight both holy and undeserved. He saved it in his notes app, thumb hovering for a moment before typing beneath it. Find her. One day. He put the phone away. After the flight, Daniel didn't return straight to his apartment. He took the long way home, through the back roads, through a diner with burnt coffee, through the cemetery on the hill. There were 23 names he knew here. All alphabetized in stone. He walked past them slowly, a ritual without candles. He reached the newest one. Marquez. Alan J. A small flag fluttered beside the grave. Plastic flowers had begun to fade from sun exposure. Daniel knelt. He placed the letter in front of the headstone, but didn't leave it. Instead, he read it aloud. Softly. Not for God. Not for anyone. Just for the boy who never got to be more than 19. I saw the sky before I went, Daniel whispered. You weren't alone. I was there. His voice broke. I forgave myself, he read, voice tighter now. I hope he does too. He closed his eyes. Let the silence swallow him. On the way home, it snowed. Just lightly. As if the clouds were exhaling. He turned the radio on for the first time in weeks. Not music. Just the weather. There was a storm warning on the East Coast. He thought about the woman and her son, about how the boy had called him strong, about how her eyes had been full of something like recognition, like she had once stood at the edge of something too, and stepped back with her child held close. Back in his apartment, Daniel unpacked slowly. There wasn't much. A change of clothes. A worn leather Bible he didn't open anymore. A photo of his unit, edges curling. He set the folded letter on the kitchen counter, and beside it, he placed a pin, silver, simple, in the shape of wings. It had belonged to a fallen medic, a friend who always said, "You save who you can. That's enough." Daniel had never worn it. But tonight, he stared at it for a long time. Then he opened a fresh envelope and tucked the pin inside, along with a handwritten note. "You gave your seat to a stranger. It landed in the right hands. Thank you. No return address. Just a postmark." He didn't sleep much that night. He watched snow fall against the streetlight, the shadows it made on the blinds. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Rourke felt the tightness in his chest ease, just a fraction. Not because the war was over. Not because he was healed. But because somewhere in a crowded airport, a woman had looked at him and decided, without needing to know his past, that he was worth a place at the table. The snow had fallen thick that morning, soft as sifted flour, clean as linen, blanketing the world in a hush that muffled even the sound of tires on pavement. Grace stood beneath the bare-limbed oak trees that circled the old playground, watching Eli make tunnels through a snowbank with his mittened hands. The air was sharp but not cruel, and every breath came with the taste of iron and pine. The swing sets creaked gently, unmanned, like they remembered ghosts. Winter in small towns moved slower. Everything felt like it had been paused mid-sentence. Grace pulled her scarf tighter around her neck and exhaled into her gloves. The cold had bitten through the soles of her boots, but Eli's laughter had a way of warming her that socks never could. He ran to the top of the slide and shouted, "Watch, Mama!" before sailing down with a whoop that made her smile before she could stop it. She was tired. Not in a way that sleep could fix. In a way that felt cellular. She'd been holding her life together with duct tape and grocery lists, hand-me-down coats and half-burned candles. Since the divorce, since her ex had driven away in a puff of exhaust and indifference, Grace had learned how to stretch everything. Money, patience, hours in the day, until it nearly snapped. She worked part-time at the library now. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and alternating Saturdays. Enough to get by, not enough to dream. The wind picked up, brushing fine powder across her coat, and she turned to shield her face. That's when she saw it. A man, walking up the path, slow, deliberate steps that crunched lightly in the snow. He wore a dark wool coat, collar turned up. Boots with scuffed leather. A knit cap pulled low. She recognized him even before he looked up. The soldier. From the flight. From a month ago. He was holding a paper bag, slightly damp at the bottom from snowflakes melting into it. He smiled, tentative. "Didn't mean to startle you." Grace blinked. "You," she faltered. "How did you find me?" He held up the bag as if in explanation. "Library hours were posted online. Asked if you were working today. They said no, but mentioned this playground's where your boy likes to dig for dinosaur bones." Eli was too busy building a snow fort to notice the stranger. Grace stared at him, part of her caught between suspicion and disbelief. "I'm not here for anything," he added gently. "Just wanted to return this." He reached into the bag and pulled out a library book. "Where the Red Fern Grows." Grace narrowed her eyes. "You're overdue." He grinned softly. "A week. I'd say worth it." She folded her arms. You tracked me down over a children's novel? No, he said. And something shifted in his voice, softer now, lower. I owed you a thank you. One that didn't feel rushed. They stood there, silence gathering between them like falling snow. I didn't do anything special, she said finally. You needed a seat. I had one. His eyes, green, tired, honest, met hers. You gave up comfort. For a stranger. That's rare. She shrugged, uneasy beneath his gratitude. It was just a seat. Daniel looked down at the book in his hands. I used to read this out loud. To the guys overseas. Didn't matter that most of them had beards or hated reading. They'd all sit down and go quiet like we were in church. Grace didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Eli came running over then, his cheeks red from the cold. Mom, my gloves got snow in them. Grace crouched to help him shake the snow loose. She looked up. Eli, remember the man on the plane? Eli tilted his head. The strong one. Daniel smiled. That's me. Eli pointed. You still look like a firefighter. Daniel knelt in the snow beside him. Well, I'm more of a helper these days. What kind of helper? The kind who returns overdue books, he said solemnly. Eli giggled. Grace straightened, brushing snow off her knees. We should get home. You're freezing. Daniel stood too. Mind if I walk with you? She hesitated, only for a breath. Sure. They walked the long way home, through old streets lined with brittle hedges, past shuttered storefronts and mailboxes leaning like old men. The snow gave the town a kind of grace it didn't usually carry, as if age had been forgiven for a little while. Grace held Eli's hand. Daniel walked beside them, not too close. She noticed he never let his hands stay in his pockets long, like he was used to always needing them free. Like part of him was still waiting to be called back into something. So, Grace asked lightly, what do you do when you're not haunting playgrounds? He chuckled. I volunteer. With a vet center near here. They were short a few hands for winter cleanup. She nodded. Makes sense. You still work at the library? Yeah. Keeps the lights on. Lets me take Eli to school and back. She hesitated. It's not glamorous, but I like the quiet. Daniel glanced at her. I think quiet's underrated. They reached her small rental house, a faded blue with one porch step that always creaked. Can I play in the yard? Eli asked. Boots stay on, she warned. He ran to the backyard with a whoop, and the crunch of his feet on snow followed them like laughter echoing through trees. Daniel lingered on the porch. Thanks for letting me walk with you. Grace nodded. You didn't have to come find me, you know. I know, he said. But I wanted to. They stood there a moment too long, the kind of silence that asks a question without needing an answer. Then she cleared her throat. Want some coffee? He looked surprised. I'd love that. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon and laundry soap. The kind of clean that came from effort, not ease. Grace poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. Daniel looked around but didn't comment on the bare shelves or the cracked picture frame above the couch. He just took the mug gratefully and sat with care. Eli's dad. Grace began, then stopped. He left. That's all you need to know. Daniel nodded. You don't have to explain. They sat in a silence that didn't press. It just rested, like it had earned the right. Finally, she asked, was it hard? He looked over, eyebrows raised. The war. He studied his mug. Some parts still are. She waited. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled something out. A folded envelope. He placed it on the table. It belonged to a friend. I carried it for months before I could read it. Your seat, your kindness, was the thing that let me open it. Grace stared at the envelope. What did it say? Daniel looked out the window. That he forgave himself. And hoped I could too. She touched the edge of the envelope with her fingers. Did you? He didn't answer right away. Then, I'm trying. Outside, Eli waved through the window, his hands in the air like he was summoning clouds. Both adults smiled. Daniel stood slowly. I should go. But I meant it. Thank you. Grace walked him to the door. He stepped out into the snow. Then paused. Would it be all right if I stopped by again? She looked at him. Something behind her ribs softened, not with romance, but with recognition. Sure, she said. Just return your books on time. He gave a small salute. Yes, ma'am. Later that night, she pulled Eli's coat from the chair to hang it properly and found something in the pocket. A small silver pin. Angel wings. She froze. It hadn't been there this morning. Eli, she called. He looked up from his coloring book. Yeah. Where did you get this? He grinned. The soldier man gave it to me. Said it was for my backpack. Grace looked down at the pin in her palm. It felt like more than metal. It felt like memory. Like tribute. Do you want it back? She asked gently. Eli shook his head. Nope. He said it was mine now. Said brave people share their wings. That night, as the wind rattled the old glass panes, Grace sat by the window, her hands around a cooling mug of tea. The snow had covered the footprints now, but the weight of the day still shimmered in the silence. She looked at the pin on the table, then at her son asleep on the couch, his arms curled under his chin. She whispered, to no one and maybe to someone, You found your way here, didn't you? The first warmth of spring came with birdsong, thin and tentative, echoing through the still cold trees like a secret trying to remember itself. Grace stood in the garden outside the community center, fingers damp with soil. She was helping arrange small flower beds around the Veterans Memorial, volunteering, like she did most Saturdays now. The earth smelled rich and dark beneath her gloves, and the sun, though shy, had finally dared to show its face. Nearby, Daniel stacked folding chairs with two other men. He moved easily among them, not giving commands, not taking them. Just working. Present. He'd come every week since winter passed. Never pushing. Never asking. Just showing up with a thermos of coffee and a readiness to help. They still weren't a thing, not in any way you could name. But Grace had stopped wondering if he'd call. He just did. He just came back. Sometimes that's what healing looked like. Not vows. Not grand confessions. Just consistency. A rhythm where once there had only been static. A little girl tugged on Daniel's sleeve then, barefoot in sandals too small, her braids tied with mismatched ribbon. Hey, mister, she said, holding up a crumpled piece of paper. I made this. He knelt beside her and accepted it carefully, as if it were an antique. The drawing was simple, a soldier with wings, kneeling beside a woman holding a child. In the sky above them floated a sun wearing sunglasses and a smile. My mom says heroes don't wear capes, the girl explained. They wear boots. Daniel stared at it a moment too long. His fingers curled slightly around the edge of the page. Grace, watching from across the lawn, knew that stillness. She wiped her hands on her jeans and walked over. She didn't speak, not at first. She didn't have to. Daniel slowly folded the drawing, tucking it into his coat pocket like a prayer. "She's not wrong," Grace said softly. His voice came quieter than usual. "They called me a hero once. I couldn't stand it." She sat beside him on the edge of the garden bed. "You never told me much about what you did over there. Because most of it doesn't feel like mine to tell." "Then tell me what is." He looked down at his hands. They were nicked with small cuts and dirt from lifting crates. "But steady. There was a medic I trained with," he began. "Real loudmouth. Used to say, 'You save who you can. That's enough.' I never believed him. Not until after." She waited. "There was a boy, 19, bled out in my arms. I carried his letter home. His mother couldn't open it. She gave it to me." He reached into his coat, pulled out a second envelope, this one addressed in careful cursive. He didn't open it. Just held it between his palms. "I couldn't read it. 4 months. Not until that flight." Grace looked at him, still and listening. "You didn't know what I was carrying," he said. "And you gave me that seat anyway." She smiled, faint and steady. "The seat wasn't mine. It was waiting for someone." He turned to her then, eyes shining with something not quite sadness and not quite peace. "I think maybe it was waiting for both of us," he said. They sat like that, shoulder to shoulder. Nothing romantic. Everything real. And then, slowly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Daniel leaned forward, not to kiss, but to rest his forehead against hers. Their eyes closed. The silence held them, weightless. That was enough. Later that afternoon, they joined the others for the community picnic. It was modest, folding tables and crockpots, children chasing balloons and grandmothers guarding brownies. Eli dashed across the grass, waving a stick like a sword. He ran up to Daniel, breathless. "I got 2 popsicles. But I don't like grape." He held out the uneaten one. Daniel crouched. "You're giving me the better flavor?" Eli grinned. "Mama says sharing is how you tell people you want them to stay." Grace, carrying paper plates, paused nearby. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't correct her son. Daniel took the popsicle like it was a medal. "Then I guess I better stay." They sat in the shade together, the sun warming the grass beneath them. Grace watched Eli play, his joy uninhibited. Free. She hadn't seen him so light in months. Daniel leaned back on his elbows, gaze soft. "You ever think," he said quietly, "that maybe the seat wasn't just for me? Maybe you needed to be reminded, too, that kindness comes back around." She didn't answer. She just placed her hand next to his on the grass, fingers barely touching. He didn't move away. That evening, the sun dipped low and gold. People left in 2s and 3s. Chairs were folded. The food packed away. Daniel remained. At the edge of the memorial stood a bronze statue, 2 soldiers back to back, looking outward, forever watching. Beneath them lay a small plaque with a simple engraving. All gave something. Some gave all. Daniel approached quietly. He carried with him a new letter, one he had written last night at his kitchen table in near darkness. The ink was smudged in one corner from where his hand had trembled. He knelt, placed the letter at the foot of the statue, beside a faded wreath. He whispered, not to the statue, but to the space between worlds. "I finally got the seat." Then he stood. turned back toward the woman and the child who waited at the edge of the garden, and walked home with them, silent, steady, whole in a way he hadn't known he was allowed to be. That night, Grace lit a single candle on her windowsill. Not for prayer, not for memory, but for gratitude. In the room next door, Eli slept, arms flung wide across the bed. Downstairs, the silver pin rested on the kitchen table, its wings catching the glow of the streetlight. Grace sat beside it with a cup of tea, fingers tracing its edges. If this story touched you, subscribe and share which moment of the story you cherish the most. Your support and feedback means a lot to us.